The core is destabilizing. We need to reroute now.
I'm on it. The logs show a spike.
There, isolate that sector.
The sound of paper tearing echoed through the bright marble lobby like a gunshot. Every head turned as the bank manager's manicured hands ripped a $10 million check straight down the middle. The crisp halves fluttered to the polished floor, landing at the feet of a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, illuminating the humiliation on his face as clearly as the bold numbers that had just been destroyed. As you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of single parents who refuse to give up, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Anne's Stories. Stories like this remind us why compassion still matters in this world. Ethan Caldwell had never wanted to step inside that bank. He had stood outside for nearly 10 minutes earlier that morning, watching the city move past him under the soft blue glow of a clear daytime sky. Office workers hurried with coffee cups in hand. Cars glided along the sunlit streets. Life continued, unaware that inside Ethan's worn leather wallet sat a check that could change everything. $10 million made out in his name. To anyone else, it would have looked like a miracle. To Ethan, it felt like a test. He was 38, with tired hazel eyes and hands rough from years of working 2 jobs. After his wife Marisol passed away 3 years earlier from a sudden illness, he had become everything for his 8-year-old daughter Isla. Father, mother, homework helper, bedtime storyteller. They lived in a small apartment above a bakery that filled their mornings with the smell of bread they couldn't always afford. Ethan worked as a mechanic during the day and drove for a delivery service at night. Sleep was a luxury, stability was a dream. The $10 million check had come from a tech startup he'd helped build nearly a decade ago. Back then, before marriage and fatherhood, Ethan had spent nights coding in a cramped garage with a friend who had vision but no technical skill. When the company began to struggle, Ethan had stepped away, choosing steady work over risky dreams. He signed a simple agreement, giving up most of his shares in exchange for a modest payout that barely covered medical bills years later. He thought that chapter was closed, but the startup had exploded in value after being acquired by a major corporation. A forgotten clause in an old contract had resurfaced during a legal audit, proving that Ethan still retained a significant percentage. The company's new leadership had quietly issued a check for his rightful share. $10 million. He could pay off debts, move Isla to a safer neighborhood, set up her college fund, finally breathe. But standing in that bank lobby under the harsh fluorescent lights, he didn't look like a millionaire. He wore faded jeans, a simple navy shirt, and a jacket with grease stains that no washing could fully erase. His shoes were scuffed. His beard needed trimming. He looked like what he was, a man who had been fighting just to survive. The bank manager, Clarissa Whitmore, noticed him the moment he approached the counter. Clarissa was known for her precision. Her blonde hair was pulled into a sleek bun, her navy suit tailored perfectly, her posture flawless. She had built her career on structure, on rules, on never letting emotions cloud her judgment. To her, appearances told a story, and the story standing in front of her didn't match the check he placed on the marble counter. She examined it slowly, her eyes narrowing at the amount. $10 million. She glanced at Ethan again, taking in his worn clothes and nervous stance, her lips pressed into a thin line. Without asking many questions, she called over a junior employee, whispering just loud enough for others nearby to hear. The words, fraud risk and verification issue, floated through the air like smoke. Customers nearby began to stare. Ethan felt the weight of their eyes. He explained quietly that the check was legitimate. He had documentation, emails, legal letters. He had spent hours making sure everything was correct before coming in. His voice trembled, not from guilt, but from exhaustion. Clarissa listened with the kind of polite smile that never reaches the eyes. Then, in a move that stunned everyone, she declared the check invalid without fully processing it. She claimed it was likely a scam attempt, and before Ethan could react, she tore it in half. The sound was sharp and final. For a moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. It wasn't just paper she had destroyed. It was relief, security, a future for his daughter. He bent down slowly, picking up the torn pieces with shaking hands. Around him, whispers grew louder. Some people shook their heads in quiet judgment. Others simply watched the spectacle as if it were midday entertainment. Clarissa adjusted her jacket, confident she had protected the bank from a potential loss. That was when the revolving glass door behind them spun again. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped inside, sunlight outlining his figure. He paused, taking in the scene, the torn check on the floor, the stunned father, the murmuring crowd. This was Gregory Hale, the regional director overseeing multiple branches. He had come unannounced that morning for a routine inspection. Clarissa straightened immediately. She began explaining the situation briskly, emphasizing her decisive action. She described Ethan as suspicious, possibly deceptive. Gregory didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked over to Ethan. He looked at the torn pieces carefully. Then he looked at Ethan's face, not at his clothes, not at his shoes, but at his eyes. And in those eyes he saw something unmistakable. Pride wounded, but not broken. Gregory asked Ethan quietly for his identification and any supporting documents. Ethan handed over a neatly organized folder he had prepared the night before, at his kitchen table, while Isla colored beside him. Every email exchange, every legal confirmation, every contract clause. The lobby grew silent as Gregory flipped through the pages. Clarissa's confident posture began to stiffen. After several long minutes, Gregory closed the folder. He turned toward Ethan. "Sir," he said respectfully, his voice carrying across the lobby. "Please accept my sincerest apologies for what just happened." The word echoed through the marble space. "Sir." Clarissa's face drained of color. Gregory explained calmly that the check was legitimate. Not only legitimate, but thoroughly verified through corporate channels. The acquisition firm had already notified headquarters. The funds were secure. He then turned to Clarissa, his tone firm but controlled. He spoke about assumptions, about professionalism, about the responsibility of leadership. He didn't need to. Ethan stood there, still holding the torn halves of his future, unsure whether to feel vindicated or humiliated. Gregory assured him that a new check would be issued immediately, and that the bank would personally oversee its secure deposit. He also offered Ethan a private office to sit in while everything was processed. As Ethan walked toward the office, something unexpected happened. A woman who had been waiting in line, an older customer with silver hair and kind eyes, reached out and gently touched his arm. She told him she was sorry he had been treated that way. Another man nodded at him with quiet respect. For the first time that morning, Ethan felt something shift inside him. The humiliation began to loosen its grip. Inside the office, sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting warm patterns across the carpet. Gregory sat across from Ethan and asked about his story. Ethan found himself speaking about Marisol, about Isla's love for astronomy, about how she dreamed of becoming a scientist someday. He spoke about late-night shifts and early morning pancakes, about fear and perseverance. Gregory listened. When the new check arrived and was deposited successfully, the numbers appearing on the account screen felt surreal. $10 million. But what moved Ethan most wasn't the money. It was the moment Gregory stood up, extended his hand again, and said he admired men who fight for their children without expecting applause. Ethan left the bank under the same bright afternoon sun, but everything felt different. The city no longer looked like a place he was barely surviving in. It looked like possibility. That evening, he picked Isla up from school early. They went to the park, where golden daylight bathed the swings and laughter floated through the air. Ethan sat on a bench and watched his daughter run across the grass. Her ponytail bouncing, her smile wide and free. He didn't tell her about the humiliation. He didn't tell her about the torn check. He told her they were going to move to a house with a backyard, that she would have her own room, that she could take the science camp she had been dreaming about. Her eyes filled with tears of joy, and she threw her arms around his neck. Weeks passed. Ethan paid off debts quietly. He donated anonymously to the hospital that had cared for Marisol. He established scholarships for single parents studying at the local community college. He refused media interviews. He didn't want fame, he wanted peace. As for Clarissa, she faced internal review. But Ethan did something no one expected. He requested a meeting. In broad daylight, back inside that same bank, he sat across from her. She looked different, less polished, more human. She apologized, this time without defensiveness. Ethan told her something simple. He said that being judged by appearances was something he had grown used to, but that day, it had almost cost him more than money. It had cost him dignity. He said he forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because carrying bitterness would only weigh down the future he was building for his daughter. Clarissa's eyes filled with tears she had probably suppressed for years. That forgiveness rippled through the branch. Staff meetings shifted tone, policies were re-examined, customer service training changed, assumptions were challenged. One torn check had sparked transformation. Now, before we reach the end, I want to ask you something from the heart. If this story has moved you even a little, if you've ever felt judged, underestimated, or dismissed, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Anne's Stories. Your support keeps stories like Ethan's alive. And here's a special request. Comment the word respect if you believe every person deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter how they look. Years later, Isla would stand in her own laboratory, studying the stars she once pointed at from a park bench. Ethan would watch proudly from the sidelines, knowing that the greatest investment he ever made wasn't financial, it was emotional. It was resilience. It was love. The memory of that torn check would never fully fade, but it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a reminder that sometimes, in the brightest daylight, when humiliation feels most exposed, grace can still step through a revolving door and say one simple word that changes everything. Sir. And in that word lived acknowledgement, validation, humanity. Because in the end, wealth can transform circumstances, but respect transforms lives.